Mr. Venkatesh has sort of introduced himself, but let me add that he's a coordinator of Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, CHRI, is an independent international non-government organization mandated to ensure the practical realization of human rights in the countries of the Commonwealth. CHRI also it works in the RTI space and on police and prison reforms.
I don't want to make any, I don't want to pull a long spiel on how good NGOs are or how bad NGOs are. That is not the purpose of the discussion. There is definitely cause for concern when any entity sources funding from any segment of the public or from government and claims that that money is being used for public purpose, whether in the private sector or in the NGO sector, then there must be a regulatory regime. That is the common minimum standard for me. Whether you are an NGO, whether you are a governmental organization, whether you are a private company, makes no difference. Because today I know that private companies, it may appear very silly to you, but since we have been struggling with the scope and coverage of the RTI Act, who all should be covered, who all should not be covered, even in the 10th year, this is a big question to ask. Private companies that manufacture soaps and toothpastes don't use those products only within their families. They are being sold to the general public who are completely unrelated to the producers. But still, it becomes private sector. There are questions that need to be asked, and I think the scope of this discussion today, of course, is limited to this, but there should be a continuing dialogue focused on the accountability of entities that are in the public domain claiming to do something for the public. And that is an absolute essential debate that has to happen, should not end after 2 or 3 meetings. It should be a continuous debate because these developments are going to be throughout history. Madhavan he's not around here, I don't know if he's in the room, but I'm sure he'll be coming back. When we were looking at the FCRA bill in 2010, there was a rumor of a note prepared by some entity in government, we don't even know who was that entity, which had actually called for scrapping the FCRA. And a primary reason for that call was that this FCRA of 1976 was brought in at a time when this country was under emergency and when civil liberties in this country had been suspended, and the Supreme Court of India had agreed that yes, even in a matter relating to right to life, you cannot approach the court for remedy and expect a remedy from the Supreme Court when an emergency is in force. It was the high courts which were actually granting the writ of habeas corpus when people were put behind bars. So we need to understand the historical context in which the FCRA first came. What is the context in which the new FCRA has come is not something very clear to me. Probably other knowledgeable people here would be able to tell us. I leave it at that point. There is no argument from some of us who are covered by the FCRA as an organization that we should not be regulated. No. That would be idiotic and completely undemocratic and dictatorial to say that there should be no regulation. But should the regulation be based on principles of fairness, justice, and the values that the Constitution espouses, is something that needs to be looked at. And particularly when it comes to fair treatment and non-discriminatory treatment, I do not want to repeat what Madhavan said. There is an issue of treatment of people who receive funding for whatever purposes from foreign sources. And that is an issue that needs to be debated. How can you have separate standards? If you have separate standards, there's no problem. But at least let there be conceptual clarity on why those different standards need to be laid down. That itself is not clear today, and I think the purpose of this forum should be discussing the very basics, like our dear friend here pointed out in the beginning. We must start from those basics. Once again, I would say, I am not saying do not regulate foreign funded NGOs, do regulate them. At the same time, regulate everybody else. And let me tell you one instance of how some of these decisions are made on the basis of political considerations. Everybody here has memories of watching the Lokpal agitation going on in Delhi and several parts of the country. I don't want to go into the history of it. I only want to point out one very interesting thing that happened in the context of Lokpal legislation drafting and adopting process. The original Lokpal bill that was brought in the Lok Sabha and adopted by the Lok Sabha actually covered every entity that received public donations of whatever amount. There was a section, there was a clause 13G or 13H in the bill which covered them all. And around the same time, maybe a little later after the bill was passed, the Central Information Commission of India declared that all national political parties, 6 of them, would be covered by the Right to Information Act because they are substantially funded by government. Let me also tell you very frankly, in my personal opinion, that basis for declaring them as public authorities under the Right to Information Act is not a very tenable and sound one. It is a very weak one. There are much stronger bases for calling political parties as public authorities under the RT Act. I will not go into that because that is not the subject of the discussion here. So when a bill was introduced in Parliament to show to the purpose that all political parties should be kept outside the RTI Act, some of us in the NGO sector, not because we are funded by foreign organizations, but because we have been taught some of the basic principles of fairness and justice and non-discrimination by Indian funded teachers, we found that Lok Sabha had already passed a bill which was covering under its anti-corruption law all office bearers of organizations receiving public donations. And when we saw the definition of any other body or association of persons, it perfectly matched with the description of political parties in the Representation of People Act 1951 and the Conduct of Election Rules of 1961. So we said that, look boss, there is a law that has been adopted by the Lok Sabha which makes the political parties squarely covered by the Lokpal. Now you are saying they will not be responsible for giving information to people directly. Isn't there a contradiction there? And do you know what the reaction was? The Rajya Sabha Select Committee recommended the removal of that particular phrase, and today the Lokpal Act as it stands does not cover political parties. What about accountability? Can we ask this question? Let us ask for accountability of everybody who stands out there and claims that they want to do something in the public sphere to represent the public interests. There are hardly any NGOs, whether foreign funded or local funded or non-funded or whatever, who have the guts to stand up and say, please vote for us, we will represent you in parliament or state legislature. Hardly any NGO says that. They may be involved in electioneering, they may be involved in campaigns, I am not denying that at all. Nobody stands up and says that I will represent you in parliament. Political parties do that. Should they not be subjected to a kind of a direct regime of regulation and direct answerability to people? Our accountability debate should start from there. Then of course there is a big question about the origin of funding for these political parties. There is a big debate that's going on. There is a case that's been pending in I think the Delhi High Court. I don't want to get into that because matters is sub judice. So let us wait and see what the court takes in terms of a decision on the acceptability or the permissibility of these parties for receiving foreign funds from people of Indian origin or citizenship abroad. And I have a huge problem with that as well. I have a very different view on that, but we're not getting into personal views. I just want to make one last point and end my presentation here, and that is about transparency of CSOs. Having worked on the issue of right to information at the organizational level for more than 15 years, at a personal level for more than 10 years, I believe that anybody who says that we will work for you, we will work with you in the public domain must be transparent. As far as the RTA Act is concerned, the coverage of CSOs is done in two ways. Any non-governmental organization, and we do not have a definition of the term non-governmental organization in any law in India, nor is the definition given, to the best of my knowledge, in any Supreme Court judgment. There isn't one. So non-government in our layperson's understanding is anything that is not government, that is outside of the government sectors, which means it covers the social sector, voluntary sector, religious sector, private sector, everybody. The principle in the Right to Information Act is that all non-governmental organizations that are substantially funded by the central or the state government will be directly responsible for giving access to information to people under the law, just like all other government departments. And let me tell you, today, a whole range of NGOs, thousands and thousands of NGOs which receive funding from a variety of government departments at the central and state level are all required to appoint public information officers, and many of them have been penalized for not doing so or for not giving access to information. We know this because we are tracking the jurisprudence across the country over the last 10 years. The second indirect method by which NGOs are covered by the RTI Act, and that is a unique model in the world, no other country has this. The Indian law says that wherever a government department that exercises a regulatory function on an NGO, private sector, social sector, doesn't matter, that information that is given to the regulatory department under any other law, I as a citizen can in theory access it. To give or not to give is then connected with section 8, which is about exemptions. So today, to the best of my understanding, there is nobody in the NGO sector who is neither directly covered nor indirectly covered by some regulatory regime or the other. And therefore, you can get access to information about these organizations from those regulatory departments, or if they are public authorities, from themselves directly. However, there's been a lot of talk about the influence of foreign funding. I want to place before you one instance of how foreign funding did not influence change of policy, but the change of policy was influenced by the decision of the highest court in the land, much to the dismay of people who did not want that decision. And what is the decision? The decision is of the Supreme Court of India from 2013 in the Talapalam Serial Cooperative Bank, Service Cooperative Bank, where the Supreme Court held that cooperative societies are not covered by the Right to Information Act directly, and they do not have a duty to give access to information to people because there is a right to privacy. Are you telling me that some NGO funded organization went and influenced the judges who wrote that judgment? We got to know when we went to Kerala that people of Kerala actually, and they're quite unique in that they lambasted the honorable judge when he went there for a meeting for that judgment and said, what have you done? We have a huge problem of transparency and lack of accountability in the cooperative sector, and you are saying that we cannot even get information from them? What is worse? What is worse is that in order to prove that a cooperative society is covered by the Right to Information Act, a person has to get the information first and then prove it. Now, where is the information going to be available from? Now, thanks to this judgment, what has happened? The Bombay High Court has said that the Goa Cricket Association is not a public authority under the Indian RTI Act, and they don't have to give any information. 14th of January 2015, the Kerala High Court, in its wisdom, has said all private aided schools, colleges, etc., are not even covered by the RTI Act, which means that coverage where you can indirectly get the information from the education department, even that is gone. And this in the face of a government policy which said that yes, we are funding government schools and colleges, and they must be transparent to people directly. The court has reversed it. Now let us look at all these areas as well, areas of concern as well. We today may be very concerned about NGOs, but to the best of my understanding, after the 97th Amendment to the Constitution of India, cooperative societies, the right to establish them is a fundamental right. What about the transparency of this NGO sector? Whether they receive foreign funding or domestic funding, that is immaterial. Because cooperative societies are not set up just for the sake of the interests of a few people. It could be for a few people, or it could be for the larger public as well. But there is a major deficit of transparency in these bodies. So we need to locate ourselves in these historical contexts of the contraction and the expansion of transparency and accountability. And my absolute last point is, my organization, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which I represent, where I am paid for my bread and butter and my daily livelihood, we publish our annual reports on our website. We get RTI applications from people, and we send them information free of charge about our annual reports, our spending pattern, our source of funding, on what heads of expenditure are we spending money, how much on salaries, how much on administration, how much on workshops, how much on publications. Everything is made public, not only by us, but also by the FCRA wing of the MHA. that does not mean that everybody else is doing it, but when questions are raised that how many NGOs are doing it, I would like to point out that yes, there are some of us who are doing this. We do not want any laurels, we do not want any awards. We believe this is the right thing to do because that is exactly what the law wants us to do. If that kind of a self-regulatory regime is brought in and NGOs are actually conscientized of the fact that they need to be transparent and accountable to people, I think some of these discussions will later on become absolutely immaterial, because that whole inward feeling towards being, the inward sense of wanting to be transparent and accountable will work wonders even in the absence of a law. I would like to thank Madhuji for giving me this opportunity to make my presentation here, and any questions we can take them up later on. Thank you.